So, a funny thing happened recently. Our writer had an idea for a comprehensive video on SS uniforms. A good idea, right? What could go wrong? Well, it turns out he forgot just how massive that topic actually was, and so while he intended to cover the lot, Waffen and Allgemeine SS uniforms, variation between those of both officers and enlisted men therein and the like, that ain't happening. And so we boiled it down to the subtopic we figured would be of most interest to you, and that would be combat uniforms of the normal enlisted soldier. So, let's begin. The SS uniform, the model 1932, you know the one, that black one, was never actually worn in combat, and instead, for such purposes, the SS wore uniforms that were near mirrors of their Wehrmacht counterparts, just with little tweaks here and there that put their own personal design flair on them. As for what the uniform looked like, at least early on the top was the model 1937 tunic. The M37 is something of an enigma in the historical zeitgeist, as many historians and collectors overlook that it was ever a thing for some reason, but it absolutely was. First adopted in 1937 by the SS Verfügungstroop, as well as the LSSAH, a forerunner to the first SS Panzer Division Leibstandart SS Adolf Hitler, in order to give them something to wear in the field, as they underwent their transformation from a cohort of bodyguards to a proper military unit. The M37 replaced the old black colour of the M1932 with the Feldgrau or field grey colour of the Heer's service uniforms. It did retain the open collar design, as you can see here, as well as the internal lower pockets, which you can see here. In fact, were it not for the fact that it introduced shoulder boards, as you can see if we bring our first photo back up, it literally would just be the Feldgrau version of the M1932 tunic. The shoulder boards are worth zooming in on too, because they're actually a treasure trove of information and a valuable thing to understand if you're trying to glean information from period photos or surviving uniforms. As a design, they were pinched straight from the army, which had been using them since way back in the imperial days to denote both role and rank, and the SS used them in the exact same way. For the matter of role, that, rather annoyingly, given that World War II photos are black and white, was donated by the colour of their piping. White for infantry, yellow for cavalry and reconnaissance, pink for armoured, red for artillery, black for engineers, dark blue for medical, and light blue for logistics. Different shades of light green were also used for mechanised infantry and light infantry, but, and this is going to sound crazy, we have literally no idea which is which. Given that we have plenty of surviving uniforms and documentation, as well as surviving veterans we can just ask, you'd think this would be a settled matter, but no, we really don't have a clue. No original colour photos exist that show us, no documents survive that tell us the exact shade, the veterans all disagree if you ask them, and surviving uniforms are now so old that everyone bickers over how faded they are or aren't, and therefore how representative they are of the original colour. Because of this, just don't worry about the specifics and know that the two separate shades of light green existed to denote two separate roles. As for how shoulder boards denoted rank, that would be due to the fact that when a soldier started climbing into the NCO ranks and higher, various gubbins was attached to them to denote where they stood in the pecking order. For the lowest rank of NCO, specifically an Unterscharführer, which was roughly equivalent to a modern NATO corporal, that consisted of just a bit of silver trim around the edges, which you can see here. Come the rank of Sturmscharführer or a NATO W01, things got much more fancy, with the silver trim now extended all the way round and 3 pips having been popped on for good measure, as you can see here. From there, things only got fancier still, with officers' boards ditching the wall altogether and going for pure silver piping, as you can see here on these Untersturmführer examples akin to a second lieutenant, and here on these Oberst Gruppenführer ones, which is equivalent to a general. And as you have no doubt already spotted, pips were retained for officers too. Coming away from the shoulders now, we have to talk about the arms of the SS tunics, because again, they put some really specific details on here which are a godsend if you're trying to identify original photographs. The first of these is the sleeve eagle, which was retained in the same style in the same place as on the fancy M1932 uniform. So if you see a soldier with an eagle on the arm, you know for certain he is from the SS. Although do note, you will also see this shape of eagle from time to time, which is actually the Wehrmacht version, as the SS did help themselves to Wehrmacht stocks from time to time when their own supplies were running low. Fortunately, however, the Wehrmacht wore theirs above the right breast as worn, which you can see here, so SS soldiers are still easy to identify, even if it does lead to the bizarre and abnormal photos such as this one. Also of note is cuff titles worn on the left sleeve. They were fabric bands embroidered with the name of the wearer's formation, a small little design flair simply intended to mark the SS out as elite. For example, divisions such as the Leibstandart, SS Adolf Hitler, Das Reich, and Totenkopf each had their own distinct cuff titles, which you can see here, here, and here, respectively. The design cuff titles varied according to rank and unit. High-ranking officers often had cuff titles made from finer materials, embroidered in silver bullion to signify their elevated status, while enlisted men had simpler embroidered versions. The titles were most commonly made from black fabric, with the names of the divisions or units embroidered in silver or white Gothic script, adding to the formal and distinctive appearance of SS attire. Beyond their practical purpose as unit markers, cuff titles became an essential part of the SS's visual and symbolic identity. Oh, and one more thing. If you're after another dead easy way to tell if a tunic is SS or Wehrmacht, have a look at the collar, because where the Wehrmacht would say Litzen or collar tabs, which were just a bit of design flair that had coloured stripes that denoted role, much like shoulder boards, the SS used collar tabs that had a giant set of runes or divisional insignia, if a foreign formation on the right side and a denotation of rank on the left. As an example, here is a normal set with the runes and a blank left side to denote his being a man or private. Here's the same again for a Rottenführer, a lance corporal, and here is what was worn by a member of the British Free Corps. Bringing it back to the tunics themselves as opposed to the various things that were attached to them. Remember when we said that people had a habit of forgetting the M37 tunic existed? So what did those people think that they wore instead? And that would be this, the M1936 tunic. It was introduced by the Wehrmacht in 1936 and was intended to be a suitably ornate and fancy new tunic for the new Germany's new army, with little expense spared in its construction. It remained a utilitarian garment, first and foremost of course, with design features, holes, belt hooks, to help distribute the weight of equipment fastened to the belt, but was then festooned with a bottle green collar, as well as pleated and shaped pockets. When fully decked out and badged up for army use, it typically looked like this. Where it gets confusing is that the SS did use the M36 tunic, as many of you will no doubt have already ascertained by that photo of a ruined up one we not too long ago stuck on the screen. The caveat is that it was not used as a priority. The SS were meant to universally have the M37, but the M36 was used to plug the gaps when supplies fell short. And just to really complicate things further, the M36 and M37 were only commonly used at the start of World War II. You see, Germany wasn't exactly awash with resources when the war broke out, and so the more splendid designs of the aforementioned invariably had to be simplified even more as the war progressed. Mercifully for the video's run length, however, when the SS had to simplify the M37, they abandoned having their own unique design altogether and just helped themselves to the Wehrmacht's ideas. Firstly, this came in the form of the Model 1940, an M36 that just had its bottle green collar omitted. Easy. Then there was the Model 1942. That did away with the pleated pockets and also added a 6 button to compensate for declining wartime manufacturing standards, and then the Model 1943, which straightened up the pockets just to save that tiny bit more material. And did the eagle-eyed among you notice that neither the M42 or M43 we just pictured had 6 buttons? Well, that's because while the SS did use Wehrmacht designs, they wanted to keep their own flair. So they kept the old 5-button setup for their own ones, just so that they could keep some semblance of a separate identity. Then, finally, they also introduced a brand new style of jacket in 1944 called, shockingly, the Model 1944. This was just a Germanified knockoff of the British BD style of tunic that used way less material due to only being cut to the natural waistline. Here, at least, the Wehrmacht and SS variants are identical, and by that point, things were going so bad for the Reich that they really didn't have a choice. Mercifully, whereas SS tunics are an absolute minefield, full of ever more variations, changes, subtle details, and expectations to those rules, the trousers they wore are remarkably simple. They started off wearing the Model 1937 trousers, which had been designed to pair up with the M37 tunic, and interestingly, they weren't exactly hyper-utilitarian either, essentially just being a civilian cut of trousers made out of military-issue Feldgrow wool fabric, with buttons up to the top for mounting a pair of braces, a pair of pockets that were slanted for easy access when sat down, and a pocket watch pocket up front. And that's really all there is to say about their design. There's no weird extra insignia or markings you need to be aware of. They really were just Feldgrau trousers. But it is worth noting that here actually used a different colour early on, as their trousers were actually in Steingrau or stone grey, a real shade of grey as opposed to the very clearly green Feldgrau, with them eventually ditching Steingrau in 1940 and making the whole lot Feldgrau, which the SS did right off the bat. This little difference is often overlooked because while it might be blindingly obvious when comparing surviving uniforms, old black and white cameras just didn't particularly capture the difference, as this photo of Heer troops marching into Poland can attest. When the time came to simplify the M37s later in the war, once again the SS would ride off the back of the Wehrmacht's work, but without any weird flares of their own this time. Instead, just straight up taking their design for themselves. As for what exactly the Wehrmacht did, rather than just simplifying, they also took the chance to make them more utilitarian, as just normal cut trousers made out of military fabrics, while they did the job, weren't exactly ideal. They did this after a few tiny production variants we really don't have time to discuss, with the model 1943, a far baggier design that also added crotch reinforcement, ankle fasteners, as previous models had depended purely upon just being tucked into the boot, and also moved the brace buttons to the inside in order to free up more space for proper waist belt loops. And that's really all there is to say on the matter of trousers. So let's move on. When it comes to footwear, you likely have one particular type in mind, one that has become synonymous not just with the SS specifically, but Nazism more generally, and that would be jackboots, or to give them their proper name, Marchstiefel, or marching boots. And as much as there's nothing we love more on this channel than taking flawed preconceptions, putting them under the microscope and getting to scream actually at you all, sure enough, the SS did sport that iconic footwear, for a time anyway, and we shall explain all as the chapter goes on. Marchstiefel themselves, while very much chosen for their look and what they represented rather than their practicality, being a very smart looking boot with a heritage that goes all the way back to pre-unification Prussia in the 19th century, were actually a very handy bit of footwear, being comfortable when broken in, nice and tall to keep all manner of crap out, and exceptionally grippy and durable thanks to the many hobnails and toe plate that were fitted to their soles. These boots would serve the SS well up until 1940, at which point the economic demands of wartime meant that things such as an entire 30 centimeters of high quality leather poking up over the ankle was suddenly a luxury that the Reich couldn't afford. And so a search for a replacement began, and fortunately they had just the thing in their inventory, because every soldier was already issued so-called Schnürschuhe, or lace-up shoes, low boots that had originally been intended to be worn with the Blutkleidung, or work uniform, a cheap and cheerful linen uniform that was worn when engaged in menial non-combat activities that weren't worth wearing the proper uniform out for. Brilliant! The SS and indeed the Wehrmacht thought in unison they'd just authorise the Schnürschuhe for combat use, which they did in 1940, and slowly start phasing out the Marchstiefel, with their manufacturer for enlisted men ultimately coming to a final halt in 1943. But what to do about the giant gap that now existed around the ankle? The solution, much like the M44 tunic we looked at earlier, came from copying the British homework, specifically their gaiters, or Gamerchen as the Germans called them. Just being a mostly rectangular slab of canvas, sporting leather buckles, they did the job of keeping crap out of the soldiers' boots perfectly, and began being issued from 1940. The transition was a slow and gradual one, and Marchstiefel continued to be issued to enlisted men from old stocks right up until the fall of Berlin, but sure enough, they became rarer and rarer over time, to the point that you can look at photos from the late war and struggle to see a single pair at all. When it comes to headgear, we'll worry about the two sorts you most commonly see in photos, namely helmets and casual caps. For the former, there are three key models we need to worry about: the models 1935, 1940 and 1942. Introduced in 1935, the M35 was a fancy, no expense spared lid that featured a rolled edge and separate air vent inserts, providing a smooth finish and robust construction. SS helmets of this model were typically adorned with two decals, the SS runic emblem on the right and a big old party swastika on the left, distinguishing them from other branches which used their own variations, with the Heer using these ones, the Kriegsmarine these ones, and the Luftwaffe these ones. In 1940, to streamline production and conserve resources, the M40 was introduced, which retained the rolled edge but incorporated stamped air vents directly into the shell, eliminating the need for separate inserts. During this period, the swastika decal was discontinued on SS helmets, leaving only the SS runic emblem. A smart idea too, because what with it being bright red, the swastika decal did rather scream, "I'm here, feel free to shoot me." By 1942, further production simplified led to the M42. This design featured featured a raw, unrolled edge, allowing for faster and more economical manufacturing. Around this time, the SS rune decal was also largely abandoned. Partly, this move was done for visibility reasons, just like the swastika decal before it, but more so in this case, it was done to expedite production. The M42s were also finished with a rough, matte texture to minimize reflections and enhance camouflage effectiveness. Do note too, as ever, all helmet variations would remain in service till the end of the war. It was simply that as the war dragged on, the earlier ones became less and less common. As for casual caps, or field caps, if we wish to be more accurate, SS troops wore several models. To begin with, it was the Dienstmuts, or service cap, but do note collectors also referred to this as the old style cap, in reference to its similar shape to old Imperial era caps. As you can see, it featured the distinctive SS Totenkopf and eagle insignia, usually in hand-stitched or metal form. But that hat wasn't exactly what you would call practical for field wear. In addition to being monstrously expensive when being made by the million, and so the model 1940 field cap was introduced in its titular year, as you can see from this picture, it's a standard field grey wall-side cap with the usual SS insignia, nothing too much to note here. Another radical change in Bonce coverings came in 1943 with the introduction of the M43 field cap. This one was all about practicality, featuring full head coverage, a visor to keep the sun out of the wearer's eyes, and a button-up flap that could be pulled down to offer some protection to the ears and neck during cold weather. Like much of their gear, the M43 was also used by the Wehrmacht, but the M44 variety, which was made in small numbers and was basically just an M43 but with one big button on its flap, appears to have been used exclusively by the SS. Further to all that, you'll also see camouflage caps from time to time. These came in every pattern the SS used and were a mix of factory made and made in the field. And that's about all we can say on the matter without really going down a rabbit hole. Remember when we said we'd have to really trim our focus down to stop this video becoming stupidly long? Well, it turns out that even that framing was pushing it a bit, so here's all the load carrying gear and equipment that you need to know about, but super condensed. Gas mask canisters, that circular thing they always had on their backs, does what it says on the tin, pun intended, and basically didn't change throughout the war. Note also the gas cape, a rubberized sheet they could quickly throw over themselves in the event of a gas attack to give themselves time to get their mask on. Early war, it lived on the chest. Late war, it was strapped around the canister. Belts now, the same type as used by everyone else, but with an SS specific buckle. Here is what the SS one looked like, and here's what some of the others look like. Easy. Ammo pouches, weapon specific, unlike the Brits who used more universal style pouches. Materials changed throughout the war, and here's a load of them on the screen for you. Pistol holsters made out of hard leather, so-called hard shell early war. They moved more towards floppy leather, so-called soft shell late war. Entrenching tools, two sorts. A fancy folding one that doubled up as a mattock, introduced in 1938 to replace an old school straight-handled one Germany had been using since the Imperial days. The straight one also began being made again late war due to it being simpler. Bayonet, only worrying about the one for the K98K, Germany's service rifle, it basically never changed, but it started out with Bakelite plastic grips, which began to be supplemented with wood from 1941 due to material shortages. Bread bag, a bag for bread, shockingly, but also other bits. Its design basically never changed, and you can see an example on the screen now. It also had straps for fastening mess tins and water bottles. Y straps, funnily enough, these were straps that were Y-shaped. They went over the shoulders and fastened to the ammo pouches and back of the belt, and thus spread the shoulder's load across the body. Other gubbins could also be fastened to them, with the most notable example being the A-frame, a strapped pack of sorts which could be attached to many things: mess tins, blankets, and Zeltbahns. A handy dandy camouflage poncho that could also be made into a tent, a stretcher, and a weather shelter by buttoning multiple ones together. The Wehrmacht used these too, but the SS ones came in their own snazzy prints. Note too, because the consensus seems to have been that the A-frame was a bit of a pain in the more often than not, you actually see these strapped to the belt, with them even making special straps exactly for this purpose. And that should do us for today, we think. It may shock you to hear this, but we have actually barely scratched the surface of this topic today, as evidenced by the fact that German Pistols and Holsters 1934 to 1945, written by Robert Whittington, is 352 pages long in its 1990 edition. Naturally, with a title like that, he covers ones used by both the SS and the Wehrmacht, but you get the idea. There's an endless amount of variation in type, specifics of manufacturing, and all manner of other things. That makes this topic simply huge. Fortunately, however, we didn't intend for this video to be a be-all and end-all resource or the most definitive thing ever penned on the topic. Instead, what we were going for was a decently in-depth primer to serve as a foundation. Enough for you to be able to have a look at period pictures and museum exhibits and know generally what you're looking at, and we certainly think we've done that.